Welcome to User's Guide to the Soul. We're just preparing to record, and we're on chapter 34 with our class. And I don't know, can you guys give me thumbs up if you see the record? I see it preparing.
Yeah.
You see
Yeah,
the
do you
record?
want to turn the light on?
We're going to go live on Facebook.
Yeah, turn the light on.
Yeah.
Turn it on.
So welcome. We're now going live on Facebook. Welcome to User's Guide for the Soul. Today we will learn Kabbalah's secret free pass to infinity. You get a coupon to infinity every time you do this phenomenon. So if you want to learn about that, please join. We're learning the Tanya. This is on chapter 34, page 454 of this edition of the Tanya, which you can order online at Kahot or other places, or look at the link if you're watching after. I'll post the link to the text we're learning. And we're learning really, there's something that is hiding in plain sight in Judaism that's innocuous, perhaps, that's so easy you can just pick it up like a pebble, and yet it is a coupon, a free pass to complete infinity, to really total communion with the essence of the Ein Sof. So we're learning that in this chapter, and it's something that can really not just fill your practice with joy, but really get you in a state where you're really the best functioning person, where you're always doing the right thing that your soul has been created to do at every moment. It's a beautiful tool. So we just finished chapter 34. And by the way, you may have heard that Rabbi Steinsaltz passed away, Olav Shalom. I learned from a lot of his texts. He's probably best known for having made the Talmud accessible to people that aren't fluent in Hebrew and Aramaic in particular. But a true genius. They worked just tirelessly. His schedule was incredible, put out such a volume of materials, and really opened up parts of the Torah to people that wouldn't have access. So let's perhaps dedicate this class to Rabbi Steinsaltz, that his soul should have an aliyah. And he also was a practitioner of this particular system. He was a Chabad Chassid and close with the last Rebbe of this system and one of his Chassidim. And so, we actually are using his commentary on the Tanya as part of his book, and I'll pop that open today so we can have some of his words be with us. Yeah. So we just learned in chapter 33 that a way to be joyful all the time, and this is proactive. This is not, as we learned in previous chapters, this is not. I'd love to check that I'm live on Facebook. Maya? Oh, Maya's not there. I'll trust it. So in the past chapters, we've been reactive and troubleshooting. So once we have our system of meditation that gets us to a high functioning state of perhaps even a Beinoni, and you can look at our past classes for that if you're curious. Once you have that system in place, being joyful is the most powerful tool to make sure that you actually apply that system day to day, all the time, right? And so anything that's in the way of being joyful, we want to get a tool to eliminate it, to get it out of the way. So the Alter Rebbe went through in detail all the factors that will get in the way of joy in a person's life practice, and gave us a tool for each one of those. Then in chapter 33, after a little diversion, we went into being proactive. Now, there's nothing that's weighing me down in particular. There's nothing in my way, but here's a tool that can just amp up your joy no matter what the surrounding circumstances are. And that tool was to recognize that when I do a mitzvah, I'm completely one with God every time. And if I recognize that, then every time I do a mitzvah, I'm just filled with joy that God is right here. And also that the entire world is basically godliness. And I meant to meditate on the fact that the whole world is non-existent compared to the Ein Sof. And we went through a whole mashal, a whole metaphor of how non-existent it is, perhaps like a ray of light within the sun. But once I recognize that the world is not even here, then no matter what's going on in front of me, my eyes are open, I'm talking to people, but I'm recognizing that really I'm so close to God. I'm like the next word that I'm going to say after this class, as it is hidden within my power of thought. That's how close I am right now. And if I can have that be the lens through which I interpret reality, I'm always going to be happy because I'm always close to God. And finishes with images to show us, how important that is, like I'm hosting a king in my house, etc. So that was a chapter on using this phenomenon of closeness to God to create joy. In this chapter, it's the last of the chapters that deal with how we carry out this technique of spiritual growth. In this chapter, we talk more about really understanding how every time I do a mitzvah or learn about mitzvahs or learn Torah, how close I really am to God and how unified I am to God, more in order to get me to do mitzvahs and to learn Torah, right? So that includes honoring your parents, it includes not lying, it includes not yelling. So if you can do this, you're really going to be one of the most high functioning individuals that I've ever met, that I know. If you can really get this in place. We started by talking about the chariots, which are, the patriarchs, the matriarchs. And what is the phenomenon of a chariot? We talked about how when we were all at Sinai and God came down into the world, we were all at that level where Ein od milvado, there's nothing else besides God. And it was clear. I'm standing on this mountain. There's this thing that looks like fire. I'm seeing these sounds. My soul is just recognizing that it has no reality of its own and it's being blown out of my normal consciousness because it can't handle the level of divine reality. We were all there, but we couldn't deal with it. So then God agreed, okay, build a mishkan, build a tabernacle, and later a temple, and I'll limit that what's the word I want to use? That level of it being recognizable that there is no world, there's only God. I'll limit that revelation to the tabernacle or to the temple in the Holy of Holies. So you'll come there, you'll get a little glow from that, but I'm not gonna have it be your reality all the time. The patriarchs were actually able to have that kind of mindset 24/7 in every part of their body and soul and in everything that they did. So where we might, get closer to that level at certain times, at high holiday services or at a moment in our life, they were up at 100% all the time, down to their little pinky and their little toenail. So everything they did was total recognition, conscious and subconscious, that the world doesn't exist, that it's all just godliness. And so really, anything they said or did was kind of just transparent to God, right? Not that they were God, obviously. We don't go there. We don't worship them, even if we revere them, right? And we ask for their blessings and we mention them to God, whenever we pray, but we don't worship them. However, when they said something or did something, really what difference was there between them and God? You see what I mean? Because they were transparent. So they're not God. We don't go there in Judaism. But what they said was exactly what God wanted most to be said and exactly the way that they were just a chariot. And so we learned that throughout their lives, they didn't even cease momentarily from binding themselves in this way we're aiming at. And let's look at a bit of Steinsaltz's words on this. The patriarchs, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, reached such spiritual heights that we cannot distinguish them from the heavenly chariot that Ezekiel described in his prophetic vision. And so many of us are familiar with Ezekiel's chariot and all the very tripped out images there. So Ezekiel, as a prophet, got this vision of this chariot that was something having to do with God. And the patriarchs actually were indistinguishable from that. They were the same thing. The rider stands in a chariot and all can see him, right? The chariot is a vehicle that has no independent status. Neither determines its direction nor the particular road on which it will travel. It's just a vehicle that brings its rider to its destination. Interesting point here that Steinsaltz is making. When I look at a chariot coming down the road in a parade, maybe in the old days, am I looking at the chariot or am I looking at the person on the chariot? Mm-hmm. Right? Who am I paying attention to? So, imagine you're in Ben-Hur and you're in the movie and, one of the leads comes down on the chariot. You're looking at the actor, right? Or if you're in ancient Egypt, you're looking at Pharaoh. You're looking at whoever's on the chariot. So when you look at a chariot, It's really just you're looking at the rider. And Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Sarah, Rivka, they were the same. When you looked at them, you were really seeing the rider. You're really seeing something transparent to God all the time. When a person is a chariot of holiness, his entire being expresses holiness, the divine being within the world. So it's something special. Whenever anyone acts in a holy fashion, he becomes a vehicle for holiness. Still, that does not make him a chariot. However, the patriarchs were different. So that's what we want to understand this. And thank you, Steinsaltz, that we can actually access this level of unity with the Ein Sof, and we're going to learn how in this chapter. We've touched on it many times. But that doesn't make us a chariot. A chariot is something very special where they're at that level all the time with no wavering, with no subconscious other flow. You're just looking at 100% vehicle for godliness. Is that clear? It's an important point to understand the rest of the chapter. Any questions on that? Last week, Rick, you asked what's the difference between a tzaddik and this, and we said a tzaddik doesn't reach this level. Their divine soul is in charge. Their animal soul is just a battery pack, so to speak. It's a second divine soul, but they're not transparent to godliness to this extent. They just are all divine soul. Yes, Noreen?
How about the prophets?
He gets to the prophets here, right? And he's about to talk about Moshe and about the different prophets and how they rank. So definitely a lot of them kind of reach that, but prophecy is different than being a merkava. Prophecy is a skill of being able to access divine information and then communicate it. And if you want to hear more about it, look at the Rambam's Mishneh Torah that we started the annual cycle. At the beginning of Mishneh Torah, the Rambam talks about what it means, what prophetic power is, and what a prophet does. And it really is, a prophet can have skill in prophecy, and obviously they're a righteous person, and they're likely a tzaddik. They have to be an outstanding, pious person in their generation. But it's a certain skill to actually be able to access that information and then put it out as words in a way that gets the divine energy across, so to speak. But not every prophet is necessarily a merkava. And, there's different opinions about it, but it's a different skill. Whereas a merkava, even when they're not being prophetic, they're always 100% just transparent to God's will. It's just in their nature. On the other hand, we even have prophets that are considered evil, so to speak, klipa, right? When we look at the story of Bilam and Balak, a person can have the power of prophecy and not even be a righteous person. So it's prophecy is something like a skill that in Judaism is associated with tzaddikim and righteous people, but different than a merkava. All right, let's dive in. So we are at the fourth chunk on page 454. So we just introduced the patriarchs and matriarchs, and just as if on cue, Noreen, he answers your question. And Noreen, why don't you unmute?
Okay. After them came all the prophets, who similarly nullified themselves before God's unity in varying degrees, each according to the level of his soul and his understanding.
Right? So this phenomenon was there in the prophets, although it's different from prophecy. And they each kind of reached a certain level of just being completely transparent to godliness, depending on how great a prophet they were. Of course, the greatest prophet is Moses, right?
Moshe.
Madrigat Moshe Rabbeinu alav hashalom hi ha'ola al kulana she'amru alav shchina medaberet mitoch gerono shel Moshe.
You want me to go?
Yeah.
The rank of our teacher Moses, peace be upon him, surpassed them all. Of him, our sages said, the Shekhinah, the divine presence, spoke out of Moses' throat.
Right, so if you can imagine, the Rambam actually describes what prophecy was like. Most prophets had to kind of go into a state where they would tremble or roll on the ground. They'd lose awareness of their faculties, and they would then be able to prophesy. and speak, but it was intense. It was almost like it was painful, and they just, it was compulsion. It was a very unusual state. Or they would have musicians play music and elevate themselves to a state of kind of a semi-dream state. They'd see visions, or they'd actually see a vision in sleep, in metaphors that they had to interpret, and the interpretation was implanted in their heart. It wasn't them figuring it out. It was a different thing. But it was always an indirect kind of download, so to speak. There was something very, very intense about this divine information that they couldn't just get in their regular consciousness. Even they had to kind of lose regular consciousness. Moshe was the singular prophet that was different. And in his case, he just there. He was always ready. He was always in that state, and he could actually, so to speak to God, get that information, and then relay it to us just as his regular state. He was at such a refined level that he didn't need to lose awareness of something. So he was the greatest. And when he spoke, basically, he was so in tune that it was, like we said, it was like God was just using him as a walkie-talkie, right? So, if you've got a walkie-talkie and I say, "Hi, it's Cantor Smolash," you don't think the walkie-talkie is somehow deciding, what I said and what you need to know about it. It's just God talking. So literally, that was people's experience. They heard Moshe speak, and you sense this is just a walkie-talkie for God. This is not even a normal prophet, right? This is something unique in history. But now get back to us, right? When we were at Sinai, we actually touched that level. It was so intense that all of our souls flew out of our bodies every time we touched that level, but we did. We touched that level.
At Mount Sinai, Israel was privileged to experience a glimmer of this level of self-nullification.
Right? So when we were at Mount Sinai, that's what we experienced. And we had that moment of being a proto-Merkava, being something like Moshe. רק שלא יכלו לסבול כמאמר רבותינו זיכרונם לברכה שעל כל דיבור פרחה נשמתן חולו, שהוא עניין ביטול במציאות נזכר לאל. But they could not.
Who's reading?
Do we know who's next? Why don't we go with Eleanor, if you want to unmute? Yeah.
But they could not endure it, as our sages have said. At every divine utterance, their souls took flight, and God resurrected them each time. This flight of their soul actually represents the self-nullification spoken of previously.
We've heard the story. By the way, if you're one of the people watching on Facebook, I'm looking out for comments. So if you have a question, please put it in the comments, and feel free to join us on in the class in Zoom in the future. That was so intense that if I were a prophet, then I could have stayed in my body and consciousness and experienced that connection with God. But because the majority of us, the vast majority, are nowhere near that level, just boom, we become nullified like that ray of sun when it's still in the ball of the sun. There's no ray anymore. And that's what we each experienced at that moment at Sinai. לכן מיד אמר להם לעשות לו משכן ובו קודשי הקדושים להשראת שכינתו שהוא גילוי ייחודו יתברך כמו שהתבאר לקמן.
Therefore, because they were unable to live with this feeling of self-surrender before God, he commanded them immediately to erect for him a sanctuary in which would be the Holy of Holies, wherein his presence would dwell. Therefore, there his unity would be revealed, as will be explained further.
So now we have a little base, a home base where this can happen, but we can also live our lives, in our normal consciousness and have conversations and go to work and be souls in bodies and have our own journey. But we now know in the world, there's going to be a home base for this experience where there's nothing else besides God, where there is no world, there are no souls, it's just we're all nullified. And we'll go there every now and then on festivals, we'll go there, we'll make sacrifices, we'll get recharged with this awareness that there's no ego, there's no me, there's no you, it's just all God. And then we'll take that back into normal life, and it'll be contained. It'll be like maybe a nuclear power plant where, you know, it's sealed within a container, so it's powerful in there, and outside I get just what I need to help me to the next stage, right? To keep me going forward. And there in the Mishkan, in the Holy of Holies, even physical reality reflected that the world didn't exist. One very well-known miracle that was associated with the temple and the Mishkan is that the ark, I forget the cubits, maybe 3 by 1.5. Does anybody remember the cubits of the ark, the measurements? Anybody? Let's go with that. You know, with it. No, I'm not guaranteeing those numbers. But the ark sat there 3 cubits wide, and then the whole Mishkan was. Sorry, I should have looked at the numbers. It was 10 or 15 cubits. I forget the say it was 10. And if you measure from wall to wall, you got the full length of the Holy of Holies. But then if you measured from one side of the ark to the wall, you got half that length. And the other side to the other wall, you got half that length. And you'd be staring at your tape measure. You could do it again and again if you were allowed in there, which you're not. Measure the whole distance, and you get X. And measure the ark, which is supposed to take up some space. One side to the wall is half X, the other side of the wall is half X. And although it was there, you're looking at it, you could touch it, it took up no space. It did not register as measurement. And this is just, you got used to it. They knew, try and measure it, that's going to happen every time. And that represented what this reality was, that the infinite, where the world didn't exist, actually came down into the physical world, down to the very molecular structure of the world, such that the ark took up no physical space. But it was still there, a physical ark. So it wasn't this transcendent, otherworldly thing. It was actually physically in the world. And same thing with the tablets. The tablets had no back, so to speak. If you when you saw the text that went right through the tablets on one side, and it was Hebrew, and then you turn it around, you'd expect to see, you know, mirror writing, and it was still Hebrew again, still read properly, right? So even the tablets themselves represented that although divine will, as we'll see, has a backside and a front side, an interior and an exterior, here it's all God's face. It's all divine essence. And so the tablets had no backside. They had no, I want this because I want that. I'm skipping ahead. But everything about, yes.
How does he explain when the temple was destroyed then, and the ark disappeared? What happened?
Well, you mean what was the reason why the temple was destroyed, or how did the temple?
No, what did they do after it was destroyed then? If this was, you know,
Maureen, the Tanya has so infused you that you asked exactly the next question for exactly the next point that he's going to bring up every time. It's brilliant.
Okay.
I guess that means it's time for me to go on. I've explained this one enough, and let's turn the page. And the question is, so the temple was destroyed, right? So now what? Once the temple was destroyed,
Ever since the temple was destroyed, the 4 cubits of the halakha, example, study of Jewish law, is the only sanctuary and abode which the Holy One, blessed be he has in his world. Example, Torah is the only abode for the revelation of his unity.
Yeah, so this is a leap that if you can make, everything you do as a Reformed Jew becomes just so much more brilliant and filled with meaning, because this is what drives, you know, the traditional community to sit for their whole youth and their whole life and learn Torah for so many hours a day. It's not because they're competing to see who can you know, memorize the most lines of scripture, right? There's something else going on, and that is when the temple was destroyed, we lost our walkie-talkie. Right? When the temple was destroyed, we lost our home base, and there was no longer a physical place in the world where that complete nullification that happened at Sinai had its little focal point. It wasn't in the world anywhere anymore. We lost it. And it was like the umbilical cord was cut. We now were falling, and we had no way of accessing this source that we knew as a nation for centuries was really our vitality, our life force. That's who we were. And it was a huge tragedy. But what we recognized was, let's get back to the idea of will, because that's the way to get to it, right? When I want something, we've talked about this, when I want something for something else, that's not the essence of my will. That's not the essence of my soul, right? If I set my alarm to get up in the morning, right? I'm a regular guy. I got to get up. I got to do things. And the night before, I set my alarm for 5:30. Do I want to set my alarm for 5:30? Yes or no?
No. No.
Someone said no. I heard no. I heard yes. Do I
You
want
want to set it for 5:30, but you don't want to get up at 5:30.
Right. So I want to set it 5:30. If I didn't, I wouldn't set it. Right. So I do have will to set it. That's why I'm setting it. But the reason there's a no in there is, why am I setting the alarm? For itself or for something else?
For something else.
For something
I
else.
want to get up in the morning.
You
Right?
got to get up for a reason.
So if I'm looking at will is complex, and it has an outside and an inside. And me wanting to set the alarm, that's the outside of my will. Yeah, I want to set the alarm, but not because that's what I love and who I am. That's because I got to get up in the morning, right? So I got to look closer. Now it's 5:30 in the morning. The alarm rings, and I get up. Do I want to get up in the morning?
No.
I don't know.
But I do, right? So I do. I mean, I do get up. So some part of me wants to get up in the morning. It's just, there's a no there, because I don't want to get up for itself. I want to get up for something else, right? And you keep going. I'm getting up because I want to go to work. Do I want to go to work? Well, maybe, right? Or maybe not. Maybe I just have a job to pay the bills. And so I'm going to work to pay the bills, right? And why do I want to pay the bills, right? Oh, because the bills are food and a home for my family. Oh, right? Now, if you keep going, you finally get to like, well, you want to feed your family and you want to have, children. You finally get to the middle, and someone asks you, well, why do you want to have a family? Oh, that's kind of a deep question. That's it's just who I am. It's the most amazing thing, or God trusted me to raise these souls. I mean, it's such a privilege. I don't know, there's nowhere else to go. There's nothing else that I'm depending on. And if you ask me, do I want to have a family? Yes. Right? There's no in there anymore. That now is the essence of my will. If you can't find another reason why you're doing the thing, now you've found what the person's soul is about. Now you've touched the innermost point in the essence of their will. And we even learned there's a backside to the will. There's sometimes something I really hate doing that I have to do, that I'll do, just really at arm's length, because it's the opposite I want to do, but I'll still do it because I need to. So now look at the world, right? The world has a lot of stuff. There's a massive world. There's all kinds of, let me check if there's any questions here on Facebook. No. There's a lot of stuff out there in the world. And the question is, if I look at a tree, okay, a Buddhist would say, that tree is infinity and that tree has infinite meaning. It's true. But if I ask, did God want to create that tree? What's your answer?
Yeah.
What?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Mhm.
of course.
Yeah.
The tree's existence is God's will to create it. Anything that exists because God wanted to create it. In fact, God's will is actually the soul and life force of that tree. But why did God want that tree? For itself purely? Or maybe because of something the tree could lead to, right? So maybe God created the tree to create an apple for my child to eat on Rosh Hashanah and do a mitzvah. Maybe God created the tree for me to cut off a branch and wave a lulav and etrog, right? So that we say the same thing happens with God. As you look at the world and you see things exist, yes, God wants them to exist. But in Kabbalah, the reason the tree is there is to give me the apple for Rosh Hashanah, or to give me the branch to wave on Sukkot. And once I hit that, once I get to the mitzvah, that's actually That's the essence of God. If you go and you ask God, why do you want a Jew to wave a lulav and etrog? It's a mitzvah, right? That's the essence of God's will. And so when we do it, we now are in that same place we were on Sinai. It's just we don't have to have our souls blown out of our bodies, because this is a free pass to the same state. My soul touches it, even if my consciousness can stay here just waving around a branch or giving my kid an apple. Yeah? And when I learn about this halakha specifically, when I learn about mitzvahs, that's when I'm making God's essence recognizable in the world again. So the same way, the whole world belongs to God, but at Sinai, that was so recognizable that I wasn't there anymore. And when I went to the temple, that was so recognizable that a physical wooden box took up no space anymore. The whole world belongs to God, but when we sit and learn as we're doing, and especially halakha, now we make it recognizable again in our consciousness. And so that becomes, even though there's not a physical Mishkan, it hasn't for 2,000 years, we each can now build our spiritual Mishkan inside our consciousness and have our own Holy of Holies, where we take a little time to learn Torah, and we enter into that space where, this is why everything else is created. Nothing has any reality outside of this. All other reality depends on it. And now my life and my practice as a Jew is infused with this sense of total infinity and the world not existing. It's been a long walk for an amazing thing. Any thoughts or questions about that? Did you follow me there, or was it just yeah? Yes, Eleanor? Oh, this is good. Okay, good. Okay. That's I think that's the heart of this chapter, if we can get that. Yeah, so God's ownership is revealed in the 4 cubits of Torah study. It's not an intellectual practice. It's a date. שהוא רצונו יתברך וחוכמתו המלובשים בהלכות הערוכות לפנינו.
For the halachot set out before us are the actual embodiment of God's will and wisdom, which are one with God's. The halachic ruling represents the divine will, and what underlines it is divine wisdom. Hence, in the Torah, God's unity stands revealed.
Exactly. So you want to get a glimpse of what was going on at Sinai, of what happened in the Holy of Holies. Now we each make this within ourselves. We make a sanctuary. And Kabbalah and Hasidus is about training my mind to recognize that reality. So it's not just happening, in heaven for me later, but I'm actually, that's my reality. And even taking it out into life. So I'm having a conversation, it's still my reality, right? And if you've ever met, not a Merkava, but just a holy person, there's someone you talk to them and you're suddenly on a different plane, right? Because they're seeing you deeper maybe than you see yourself. They're looking at you and they're saying, this is my divine providence to meet this soul. They're a spark of God. I'm a spark of God. We're one. And they just say hello to you. And suddenly you're like, there's something in me they're seeing that I'm not usually aware of. And it gets me to reach there. Right? So we can do that for ourselves and for anyone around us. ולכן, אחר שיעמיק האדם מחשבתו בעניין ביטול הנזכר לאל, כפי יכולתו זאת ישיב אל ליבו. We're at, I forget. Karen, are we you? I lost track. Why don't we go with Karen? Karen, would you like to read for us and unmute? Yeah.
Yeah, but just tell me what page you're on. My phone dropped it.
456, therefore after, at the middle.
I lost it on my phones. I'm on 458. I lost 2 pages.
Oh, you don't physically have it?
No.
Okay.
Not my phone.
Leah, do you want to read for us, or Paula, would you like to read?
I don't think you can hear me.
We can hear you.
I can hear you, yeah.
Okay, I don't know why I lose the video on this all the time. Therefore, after one meditates deeply according to his ability on the subject of this above-mentioned self-nullification, let him reflect in his heart as follows.
Right, so here's where the Alter Rebbe admits that everything we said in chapter 33, that you could just, have intense joy all the time, no matter what, and recognize Ein Od Milvado, there's nothing here but godliness, that it's not that easy to do, right? That not all of us can reach that level. We need this free pass of learning Torah and doing mitzvahs to access it, right? So here it gives us a meditation. And again, we want to use our meditative techniques to fill our minds with this, so it really infuses our consciousness, infuses our interpretation of reality, and creates different feelings. Let's meditate deeply on this subject, that we're nullified before God when we learn Torah as we are now, as follows. Ki miyot katan sichli, v'shoresh nishmati mehachil liot merkava umishkan lichudo yibarech be'emet lamito. Let's go back to Noreen.
The capacity of my
My intelligence and of my soul's root is too limited to constitute a chariot and an abode for God's unity in perfect truth.
Right. So now we're coming back to reality, and when we have this lofty idea that I can walk around just seeing God all the time, and I can make myself into something like Abraham or Moshe. Obviously not. Right. We all have our mishigas. A lot of us are limited, especially at this time in history. Many of our souls are very, very low-level souls. That's just the structure of how the universe needs to be created from top to bottom. So we're now at the bottom, and it's a lot of, toenails and soles of feet in that business, right? We're needed, but we're not lofty souls like the patriarchs. And also our intelligence is limited. We're not been given souls that can just look out and are so sensitive to spirituality that we see it and it moves us automatically. We're more, if you look at society, we're a pretty physically oriented society, and that reflects the reality. We should know where we are in history and work with what we've been given, right? So
I have a question.
Yes.
So where do the Rebbes in our world, stand in what we're talking about?
It's a good question, yeah. So, to understand what a Rebbe is and how their level compares to the other levels at history, you want to know what Rebbe stands for. It's not short for rabbi or like a colloquial way of calling your rabbi, like, oh, he's my Rebbe. It's just like a nicer way of saying rabbi. Rebbe means Rosh B'nai Yisrael, the head of the people of Israel. Mm-hmm. So it's a what do you call it? Letters, scuba? Acronym, yeah. So Rosh B'nai Yisrael, that's what a Rebbe is the head of this whole structure of Israel. And certainly every Chassid thinks their Rebbe is the single head of the entire people of Israel, right? But there are many Rebbes, but each one of them was something like a head, and often in his generation there'd be one who really was the head of the entire people of Israel. And so the understanding is the lower the soul level of a generation, the higher a leader they need to make sure that they stay functioning properly. So, as you go through history, even though maybe 1,500 years ago, those souls were considered loftier souls in general than our souls now, because we are all at a lower level, we need a very lofty soul to be the Rosh B'nai Israel, the head of this generation. So the Rebbes in our time are thought to be really just tremendously lofty souls, because that's what we need. That's what the world needs. So God will send them down to guide our generation.
So they're not considered prophets, though.
It depends on who you talk to. I think most Reform rabbis would say no, prophecy ended with Malachi, was it? Malachi, the last prophet?
Right, yeah.
I might be wrong, but yeah, thank you. But in Kabbalah, there's definitely an understanding, a very widespread understanding, that prophecy continued. And the Arizal is considered to be a prophet of a high order. Many of the Rebbes were considered to be prophets of the highest order. I've heard my teacher Label refer to the last Rebbe of this system as a prophet of the highest order, were his words. And he had a number of audiences with him of an hour. So he really was able to sit and absorb and get a personal sense of what that meant. And anyone who had that kind of a yechidus with that Rebbe, came away, many of them, with that sense as well, that this is not just somebody who knows a lot of Torah, or somebody that has, psychic insights, or somebody that can, somehow work miracles in some way, that there was really something outstanding about that figure. So certainly in this tradition, there's a 100% sense that the spirit of prophecy continues in every generation. And by the way, Rambam also describes that, says that anyone in a future generation who rises to that level of being, what did he say, of being, first of all, being pious and righteous, really above anyone else in their community around them, and be refining themselves then to a point where they can be sensitive to spirituality, and then C, just gets that channel of information from God and then declares themselves a prophet, that there's ways to test them, and you can actually test and you can actually acknowledge someone as a prophet beyond the time of biblical prophecy. So Maimonides also agrees with that outlook. Any follow-up on that? Is that good?
That's good.
Okay. 44. Wait, time is like stretching today. I love it. We're getting so much done. We might finish this chapter. So this is what I should say and meditate and fill my mind with. Me'achar doleit machashava dili tfisa u'maseget bo yibarech klal uchlal shum hasaga ba'olam.
For my thought cannot grasp or apprehend his unity at all with any degree of comprehension in the world.
Right. So even though we're saying when we're learning Torah, we can recognize and put that meditation in that this is the essence of what God wants, and now I'm one with God and nothing else. On the other hand, give me a break. I'm still, Cantor Smollash sitting here in my sweater learning from a book, right? I haven't vanished. I still have an ego. And I really can't consciously grasp what it is that we're describing. There's a paradox here. And not just that I can't really grasp it, V'lo shemetz minhu mehasagat havot v'hanavim. Rick? Yeah.
Not an iota, in fact, of that which was grasped by the patriarchs and prophets, who were God's chariot, and by virtue of their awareness of God's unity as they grasped it.
Yes, so not only can I not grasp it, I can't grasp an iota. Yeah? I can't grasp, I'm looking for, you know where that sound's coming from? I think everybody's muted. There you go.
It's coming from Joey.
I can't even grasp, I can't get a drop of how it is that they understood and were nullified before God. I'm so far from that. So with that recognition that it's not as easy as perhaps we came away from chapter 33, Elazot eselo mishkan umachon l'shivto hu ha'esek b'talmud Torah kfi hapnai sheli b'kivut itim bayom uvalayla. Is it Eleanor?
This being so, I will make him a sanctuary and an abode by studying Torah at fixed times by day and by night to the extent of my free time.
Right. So that's how someone like me, who isn't a prophet, who isn't a Merkava, who's just a normal Jew, I can reach the same level by saying, I'm going to build this for myself. I'm going to say, give me an hour in the morning on Thursdays, give me, oh, look who's here. Amazing. Welcome, Jack. Jack's coming on. Here you go. Hope you can hear us. Hi, Jack.
How you doing?
So good to hear your voice.
Yeah,
I love your picture.
to see you.
We're on top of page 457 in chapter 34, if you got that.
Okay.
Yeah, so even though I'm going to now take time and say Thursday mornings I'll learn, Monday mornings I'll learn, maybe 15 minutes after lunch I'll learn, whatever it is, I'm going to actually build that in my life. I'm going to have time to actually bring God's essence into my consciousness, and that's going to be there. That's going to be a reality in my life, and that's where someone at my level can come back to Sinai and can touch and experience that infinity. And I promise you, if you make it a regular thing, as many of you have, or if you're watching, if you make it a regular thing, this is something you can train your mind and your heart to be sensitive to, is that, I'm coming back to this. It's not just a random thing that I've got a little time today, so I will, but no, this is when I do it. It's an appointment like all other appointments. And as I do it day to day and week to week, there's an inner knowing and inner connection that can happen where even if we're not at that level where we can be prophets or whatever, we can reach our level of infinity, right? We can touch it the way that our soul is able to. But it does take training, it does take meditation to have it be something that becomes a part of you. So it's like, no, I learned Torah Thursday at 10, right? It's not something that I just have my calendar anymore. That's me, right? I've been doing it for a year now or 2 years. Now that's me. That's my place where I do it. And if you reach in your mind, your heart to that place and you touch it, there's something there that Jews have been sourcing for millennia. There's some point of infinity that even you and I can access and can build in our lives that can flow out.
Kander, is this why they say that the study of Torah supersedes all the other mitzvah? Is this where this comes from?
Yes, absolutely. That's one. I mean, the plain reason is, in a second, Karen, the plain reason is that when you learn Torah, you'll learn how to do the mitzvahs. So if you learn Torah, you'll do the mitzvahs. That's the plain reason. But one of the very deep reasons is very much this, that if I'm encountering God's essence, that's what the whole Torah is, right? The whole Torah is not, I'm doing mitzvahs because I happen to like, waiting 6 hours to eat between meat and milk, or because, there's something amazing about thread that I want to put it on clothing. I'm doing the mitzvahs because of who made the commandments. I want to be connected to them. So when you get to God's essence, that's the whole Torah. That's what it is. Yes, Karen?
So this is so dramatic from having a mishkan that you can, I forget what the word you was, not envision, but make your own sort of. Is there something that they do when they're praying that would indicate this big change and the opportunity to be connected? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. So when I'm studying, I'm making a home for God here in the world, making a dwelling place for God where it's recognizable that God owns the world, so to speak. When I'm praying, I'm elevating everything in my life in the world back up to God. So it's the opposite direction. And I'm also, by the way, refining myself. Prayer is called avoda, work, because all the things that it's the same flow. So there's two pieces, right? One is we want to make a home for God in the world, and Torah study is beaming God's essence down into each of our consciousnesses and our environments. Then we want to raise the world up to God, and that's where prayer takes the world and lifts it back up again and lifts my heart and directs it to God, so to speak. Mm-hmm. There's a work on myself that I do when I'm praying. Prayer is a meditative experience where I'm supposed to take the wisdom that I got when I'm learning Torah, where it says, greet everybody with a smile and be modest and gentle with them, right? That's in Pirkei Avot, right? It's in Torah. I can learn it and I can make a home for God by learning it, but now I want to actually make myself like that. Mm-hmm. And if I want to work on myself and do that avoida and refine myself, it's in prayer that I actually let that wisdom become part of my personality. And so then when I leave praying, I'll be more friendly to people, even if they're not someone I get along with necessarily. And in that way, I'm raising my animal soul back up to God. So they're connected, but they're like one on the other side of a wave.
No, that's really helpful. But what I was trying to get at is, like, when you're reading Torah, is there something like when you bend the knee for, when you say Baruch, is there something physically that they do or change a tune or something? Because I think when you're reading the Torah, this changeover, allowing people to have a mishkan that can go with them in their heart or in their thinking, is giving people a chance to be connected to something that's not physical if it's destroyed. To me, that's really remarkable because it lets you continue instead of end if the building's gone. You know what I'm saying? I think it's remarkable.
Yeah, agreed. And there are some physical markers. You're not allowed to learn Torah, like if your hands are in a certain state, you have to wash them before you learn Torah. There's things like if a Torah scholar enters the room, there's actually a commandment to rise because you're honoring the amount of Torah they've infused into themselves. So there definitely are a lot of similar physical things like the bowing, that we.
But there's nothing during a service. If you were reading this during a service, there was nothing that you physically, like sometimes, you know, you do al-kait, you hit your, you know, there's nothing physically to make this a little more heightened.
Well, yeah. What do you do when they take the Torah out, right? You take a Torah scroll, everybody stands up, right? And we actually, we kiss the Torah. That's a physical sign that there's something living here that we're connecting with. And we know this is how we get God's essence down into our hearts. And just like I kiss my kids in the morning because I want their essence in my heart, I also kiss the Torah physically. So many things, certainly, God forbid, if you drop a Torah, what you do, and having that awareness in your mind when you handle it, that this is a precious thing like the Holy of Holies was. So those certainly are there to train us to recognize the depth of this. Yeah?
Don't people, when they're in prayer, actually bury themselves in their talit so that they are one, and that's their little symbol to God?
Yes, 100%. So the tzitzit on a talit represent all the commandments, is exactly what we're talking about, right? Mm-hmm. The 4 cubits of halakha, the 4 cubits of commandments, when you learn them specifically, that's the best way to create that mishkan in my consciousness. And so when I wrap myself in a talit, I'm saying I'm just completely enwrapped in my awareness, wherever it stands, of all those commandments. And I'm bringing that reality that this is just a home for God. There's nothing else that exists. I'm bringing it into my whole physical body, 100%. Mm-hmm. Let's give ourselves a little chance to meditate specifically on this, as the Alter Rebbe directed. No worries, Karen.
I have another question.
We have a question from Facebook. Let's do that. Kimberly, hi Kimberly, how you doing? Good to hear from you. It's been a long time. Are you saying that humans have the same soul as animals when you call it the animal soul? That is a great question for anyone on Facebook. So that's one of the fundamental insights of the book, is that humanity has not one soul but 2 souls, and one of them is a divine soul, which is all about other-centeredness. The other one is an animal soul, which pretty much is like an animal. An animal does have a soul, and that's the part of our soul that connects us to physicality, the part of our soul that is self-centered, not in an evil way, but simply gotta eat, gotta protect my family. And so that animal soul that we have, that is similar to the souls that animals have. The difference being that animals don't speak and don't have the level of rational thought that humans have. So that animal soul we have has an extra level that allows us to have conceptual thought, albeit self-centered conceptual thought, right? So I, as a human, can figure out how to build a bow and arrow and hunt, or how to plant food and have it grow. And that's the intellect of my animal soul, which animals don't have in their souls. They can't necessarily do conscious, rational thought. Maybe dolphins, I don't know, right? But they certainly don't have language, and they don't speak in the same way we do. Maybe dolphins, we don't know. But in general, animals don't do that. So to answer your question simply, we don't have the exact same soul as animals. We have an extra intellectual level, but there is a relationship between our animal soul and other animals' souls, because they're all the self-centered soul. They're all the self-preservation soul. And we as humans have a second soul, the divine soul, and this text is about learning how to get the divine soul to be the compass bearing for the animal soul. Hi, back. Let me know if that answers your question, Kim, and wishing you an amazing time. Good to hear from you. Yeah, so are you saying goodbye, Eleanor?
Yeah, I have a question.
Okay.
In our service, you described the call to prayer as bringing God down.
Yeah.
Okay. And that you were just talking about prayer, about raising up. So to me, those are opposites.
Yeah, so nothing is absolute. If you say, in the context of comparing it to Torah is mainly about bringing God down, and prayer is mainly about bringing God up. But if you're talking about prayer itself, both flows have to be there, right? So of course, when we say, I'm going to make time to think about God, talk about God, thank God, I'm also drawing godliness down. And any blessing that we say is specifically that. When I bless food, the baruch, the root means to draw down. And so I'm still drawing down a point of godliness to then elevate myself with prayer.
Okay,
Right.
thank
Quick
you.
meditation to finish, yeah? If anyone needs to leave, so the animal soul is automatic and the higher soul is developed. Yes, Kimberly, yeah. The animal soul is automatic. The higher soul comes in at adolescence, in Judaism at 12 or 13, and it needs to be developed like say, everyone has the capacity to hear intervals, right? Every one of us has the capacity to say, oh, that's a perfect fourth, perfect fifth. Everyone has the capacity to do a grand jeté, where, you know, if we're healthy. Having that capacity, you got to work on it. You got to develop it. So the divine soul is like that. The divine soul is something that we develop and we bring it from a sort of encompassing state where it doesn't affect my consciousness to an internal state where it drives my conscious decisions. But the energy comes from the animal soul. So that we don't want to crush it. We want to just train it. Same way we train our bodies to do beautiful balletic movements. We want to train the animal soul to do beautiful divine soul acts, thought, speech, and action. Good to have your questions. That's great. All right, let's close our eyes and slow our breathing down. The breath is definitely the physical side of the soul. So we want to have the breath flow smoothly so the soul can flow smoothly.
Excuse me.
And set up the 4 stages of breath. Let's breathe with me, starting in for 4, 2, 3, 4. Let that stay. 2, 3, 4. Now breathing out. 2, 3, 4. And stay there. 2, 3. Start over and in. Stay filled up. And out. Stay there. Wonderful that as our breath flows together, there's a little recognition inside that we're all points of the same infinity. And if you're aware of the technique of opening up the wisdom gateway, please do that. The wisdom gateway is the space between the end of the in-breath and the beginning of the out. Now together, let's introduce into our wisdom gateway this meditation from the Alter Rebbe. Although I may be of a level where I can't see it day to day, when I do this, when I build a time in my life to learn Torah, that is building a mishkan in my own heart and my own mind. And there's a miraculous union between the infinite and the finite. And I touch the essence of the Ein Sof. Just let that concept fill your mind. Full vision from every angle. Even though we're each sitting in our own homes, we're also sitting in this Mishkan. We're sitting in this Holy of Holies built. And feel any emotions you have in your heart that flow out of that concept and let them connect to your life. Certainly, if you're watching in the future, this is something one could do for 5, 10, 20 minutes and allow it to have a more profound impact. But we've reached the end of our class, so please open your eyes. And wonderful to have you. I hope that this has been a good learning. Please, if you're one of our Facebook viewers now or in the future, feel free to email Maya at temple-israel.org for the link to our Zoom class. And we'll sign off on Facebook. It's been a pleasure learning with you guys, and we can stick around and chat afterwards. Yes, Noreen. I'm going to stop the recording. There you go.